Okay, welcome everyone to an EBRC production, a panel that I'm really excited about on applying to faculty positions. Today we have 4 great faculty that have agreed to help out with this panel and help us on our path to thinking about becoming a faculty in academia just like them. And so on this panel, we have assembled faculty that are both very experienced as well as newer faculty that will be a little bit closer to having recently gone through the application process. And so with us today is one of my former PhD advisors, Domitilla Vecchio, professor at MIT in the Mechanical Engineering Department, Dr. Mark Styczynski, professor in Chemical and Biological Engineering at Georgia Tech, and Dr. Cătălin Voiniciuc, sorry, Cătălin, I'll let you pronounce that when you're up, but an associate professor in horticultural sciences at University of Florida, and Dr. Kat Majors, an incoming assistant professor in chemical and biological engineering at Clemson University. Just as other little bits of introduction, so Mark and Cătălin are both on the Engineering Biology Research Consortium's educational working group, which is how they sort of got roped into this. So thanks guys for coming and have some sort of great perspective in general on the engineering biology sort of system overall. And Kat is a member of the SPA currently until she becomes professor in full service. And then unfortunately, she'll have to become a full EBSR member, or maybe fortunately for her. Okay, so first, to get started with the panel, I'm going to close this screen sharing so that we can see them more easily. So hi, everyone. So what I'd like to ask first for each of our panelists is for them to sort of explain why they decided to become a faculty in academia, so we can sort of get on the path. Why did you decide to go into academia, and sort of what was your path into becoming a professor? And we can go in any order, but I think I'll pick on Domitilla, since she was my former advisor. Very excited to hear about this.
Hi, Russ. Hi, everyone. So it's nice to be given the opportunity to give my perspectives. So it'll be very short. So I knew I wanted to go to academia very soon as end of high school. It's just because I was in Italy, and that was the only way pretty much one could do basic research. And then of course I got carried to the United States, and I continued my academic path just because I found it full of freedom in exploring ideas that you think are interesting.
Awesome, thank you. Let's go next with Kat.
I think for me, mostly the reason I like it is similar to what Domitilla said. I like the freedom of being able to explore my own ideas. We'll talk about this later, but I really enjoyed writing my faculty application packet because I got to explore all these ideas that were mine, and I was going to get to keep them for the first time. That was very fun for me. But I also think the reason I wanted to stay specifically in academia to do science is I like being close to students, and I really was drawn to the fact that no matter how kind of senior you get in academia, whether you're an assistant professor, an associate professor, or a full professor, you're still working with students the whole time. You're still getting to train people. You're still getting to see young scientists be excited about science still. So those were some of the things that drew me to this.
Great, thanks. And then how about Cătălin and then Mark?
Thanks. Yeah, I moved from Romania to Canada and went to University of British Columbia, where Russ is currently at, for my undergraduate degree. And I thought I was going to be an engineer, then switched to biology. And in the upper level classes, I had this amazing instructor in genetics who was working with plants. And it was really his infectious passion for science that drew me to work in the lab for the first time at the end of my undergraduate degree, do masters, and then, to be honest, I did explore options in the industry, and after 1 or 2 interviews realized it's not as exciting what was available at the time. And so going on to do a PhD, really becoming on the path to independence, there was one top option, that was academia, and of course other alternative plans that I did not need to pursue in the end. So I think it's important to have the drive, but also really have the mentors to look up to for inspiration.
So my path wasn't quite linear. I was a chemical engineering undergrad major and had no idea what I wanted to do in that context. And then I had an internship, and then I wasn't super enthused by it. I'd been doing undergraduate research for a while and was like the worst undergraduate researcher in the world. And then I did this summer fellowship and I was still really bad. And then at the end, like, I did something and figured it out. And like, it was this exciting moment of like, I just did this thing that I'm not sure other people knew about. And it was super cool. And so that was when I realized, like, I really like this research thing. All along, I had somebody making fun of me, calling me professor, because when we would work in groups, I would always be like the person helping and kind of like Socratic reteaching things. And so all that kind of came together, and I realized that, like, yeah, maybe that might be a good path for me. And so grad school might be a good idea. And so by the time I got to grad school, I knew that that was the path I was on, but up until that point, I had no idea. Yeah, and then I did a postdoc because, like, it's kind of expected in the field.
Very awesome. Thanks, everyone. Now going maybe in the reverse order, back through you all, can you talk a little bit about your experience doing faculty applications? I'll leave this sort of broad, and so maybe each of you can touch on some different aspects of it, but maybe talk about when you were going through the process, some of the main things that stood out to you in terms of how you approached putting together applications, how you decided where to apply, how you decided when to apply. So maybe Mark, you don't have to go first. If somebody else wants to jump in, that's okay. But I'll let you sort of talk broadly about some things in your experience that you think that are important to convey to potential applicants here.
That's fine. There's at least one person on this call that knows that I always have something to say and won't shut up. I went up. I don't think it's good for me to talk about when I went up, because that was 15 years ago and things were different, frankly. But in terms of applying, I think there are two things that I say are paramount. One is to identify what will make you happy in the place that you go to. And two, on the practical side, to have a real vision and get beyond whatever it is that you're doing right now and think much bigger. So on number one, I knew through interactions that I won't go into now that there were certain types of places that I didn't want to land at. And so I skewed my application pool to places that I thought would have the cultural environment that I thought that I would like. For me, that was highly collaborative, interactive, with a deep caring for teaching, which is not everywhere. And I ultimately was fortunate enough to get offers at a number of places that had that, and the place that I landed is very much like that. But I think that's important. You don't want to go to some place that's just pays you the most or gives you the biggest startup or is the highest ranked, right? You have to think about what you'll be doing for the next 10, 15, 20 more years and how you'll feel on a daily basis doing it and whether it gives you the rewarding aspect. And in order to get that, you have to keep in mind that what you're doing now is not what you'll be doing for the next X years. And they're hiring you for the next job. And so it's important when you're writing that package to realize that it's not necessarily just about the details of the one project that you're maybe focusing on, but the broader vision of why you are going to be an impactful engineer and scientist, and in convincing people of that.
I guess I can continue. So at a more broad level, as a recent applicant, I think it's important to figure out what your priorities and strategies are. So I would say two obvious ones that I've considered throughout all my moves, from Canada to Germany and now in the US, were the research opportunities. So are you able to apply to an institution that is going to have the right equipment, the right expertise, that you can be successful and have that supportive community? And the second part is family. So especially if you have dependents, kids, or a partner whose career could also be at stake, you have to consider all that in the same package. In terms of you identify places that meet these criteria. I've noticed two things from looking at opportunities the past couple of years. You need some degree of luck, because there's times when in 1 year there's going to be 5 positions or more that are outstanding, and then there could be then a drought for another year or two. I had it that when I became a group leader at the Leibniz Institute in Germany, at that same time, there were positions across Europe, but nothing in the US or Canada that fit. So I was restricted to continuing in Europe at the time. Now the market has kind of shifted. So especially plant synthetic biology has lagged behind microbial bioengineering. But now in the last year, there's been at least 5 faculty positions at different institutions in the US, and more advertised kind of every day. So if you happen to be on the market at the right time, you then have many options to choose from. I personally have gone for the strategy of being very selective in where I apply, because it takes effort to do the research on the institution and go through the interview process if you get selected. So that's been my strategy, but I know of people who were successful and applied to 20 institutions in the same cycle. So I leave that out there as diverse options available.
I think it's my turn if we're going in reverse order. So as the one who did it super recently, I mean, I definitely took the approach of applying far and wide. I applied to almost, maybe not every call, but I applied to like 40 institutions, which was a lot. And I don't know if I would recommend quite that many. What I will say that I did to help manage it is similar to what everyone else has already said, is I knew what was important to me. I knew what I valued. I valued having collaborative environments. I valued having people who do research that would dovetail well with what I wanted to do, so I could have people to work with and bounce ideas off of. And then I also had things that I wanted like outside of the department. I wanted to be, oh, apparently there's a warning right now. I don't know. I wanted to be close to my family. I've always been very far away from the rest of my family, and I wanted to get back to where I could be like within a day's drive of my family. And so with kind of those criteria in mind, I ranked schools based on like my top priority schools, ones that kind of hit all of those things, ones that hit most of them, but maybe not all of them, and then ones that were kind of just like, let's give it a try. And based on those rankings, I put different amounts of effort into those applications. So the ones that were kind of that top priority, I spent a lot of time on each of those schools. There were only 5 that were in that top priority. And they got a lot of targeting in those applications, and they were very different from kind of the more general packages that I set to kind of my lower priority schools. So if you are going to send out, you know, more than 20 applications, I recommend varying the amount of effort you put into each one of them and kind of putting your most effort into the ones that you think are the best fit for you. But I will also say it is a lot of work, but it was also really fun. Like, I loved getting to come up with my ideas. I like to think about them. I love bouncing ideas off of the people who are in my environment now. And then when you go to interview weekends, they're very tiring. They're very long. They're very full days. But it's literally an entire day of talking to people about your science and hearing people tell you that your science is really cool. Whether they believe it or not, that's what they're going to tell you. And it was very, very fun to do that. So if you kind of go into it, it's just like, it's going to be exciting. I get to talk about science. I get to meet new people. You know, whether I get a job offer from the school or not, I'm going to have these people that I've now met that are part of my network. You know, it is it can be very fun if you kind of get past the fact that you're exhausted at the end of a weekend. Yeah, I think that would be what I would say.
Okay, so in my case, we go back to many years ago. So this was now more than 15 years ago. There was a 4th year PhD student, and at the time in engineering, it wasn't really required to do a postdoc. Those were better time probably. And so I just applied everywhere because I needed to get a job. So I just applied US-wide, Europe-wide, pretty much every open call in control system design, which is my area. And then something that I have to say is that my advisor helped a lot in guiding me through the process. I was completely inexperienced, and I thought, you know, you list your publications, you tell them the technicalities of what you have discovered, and that will be it. And so my advisor gave me this book, which is called Tomorrow's Professors. And maybe today is a bit, maybe not as, timely, but at the time it was a huge resource for me because that was describing how to describe your research, how do you describe your teaching, and how do you behave in an interview, which I completely overlooked at the very beginning. I thought, well, I go there, just tell them what I want to say, and that's it. And well, it's not quite like that. There are a lot of care you have to take with personal interactions, trying to understand what the other people are interested in and manifesting that interest. And so that really served me well. And then something that I also learned in the process was that at the end I got a bunch of offers likely, so I knew I wasn't getting jobless at the end of the year. And I still remember that one of the schools that made me an offer was highly ranked, but there was another school that wasn't as highly ranked that also made me an offer. And the impression that I got for the second school was that they really, really wanted me. And that was the deal for me. So that impression that you get when you visit a place, that people are really friendly, they really want you, in my opinion, makes a big difference, because that's also a signal that once you get there, they'll do everything to help you, right, in your path. And that, I think, served me well overall. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. It's really great to hear these different stories and how different they can be, right? But some shared threads for sure. I wanted to jump in on something that was briefly mentioned, the teaching aspect of things. And this is a question that a lot of people asked on the registration form, is sort of maybe from two angles of this. We don't need everyone to answer, but if you all have something to say, please do. Both from the side of sort of reviewing applications, how important is the teaching experience that somebody has for like a typical R1 research university position? And then on the other side, if you don't have much teaching experience, like formal teaching, let's say, you know, teaching a class or something like that, how can you sort of convince a panel of a faculty candidate search that you can do the teaching side of things?
So I think that this is opinion. I haven't actually served on a panel, but on a faculty search committee, but I've tried to talk to people. I think at your average R1 institution, I think that it is definitely not a requirement to have teaching experience. Frankly, most of the people that are there didn't have it when they started, and so it's assumed that you'll be able to pick it up. Some places might not even care if you pick it up well, but many places do care if you pick it up well. I think it would be different if you're talking about an institution that is maybe like primarily undergraduate, or that is less, that is not R1. Those places might genuinely want to see that you have experience, so that they can be confident that you'll come in and do well. And then in terms of convincing people, you know, if you've given presentations, you know, presentations aren't too much different than teaching in some ways, like conveying complex content in a digestible way, right? Like, so those are things that eventually on the interview, you'll be able to show. I don't think you have to worry too much. If you've done some TA stuff and you talk about, I've enjoyed that stuff and I found it effective and rewarding, to me, that's more or less going to be the baseline. And I think if you have the extra experience, it can give you a plus to some extent, but in an R1, that plus isn't nearly as big as the other pluses. So personal opinions, your mileage may vary.
Yeah, I would second that. If you're going to apply to a research intensive position, it could be a very small consideration. In fact, at least at the University of Florida, every position has a clear description of, is it 20% teaching like my position? Then you're primarily there to do research and bring in grants. So it could be a small thing. I would also highlight what else counts as teaching, which is working with students. It could be an undergraduate student that you advised in the lab. It could be if you had collaborations with other graduate students, things that may have, or outreach activities, things that you did outside of a standard classroom would also count. So as long as you're enthusiastic and open to serve where there is a need in that particular institution, I think you can get that check mark.
Shall I go? Okay. Yeah, so I think don't want to repeat what it was just said. Maybe I can just add one more flavor here, which is it's definitely true that I think in my experience, whether you have taught before, either a course or recitations is not really critical. But at the same time, sometimes positions open because there is a critical need of teaching in one specific area. So for example, some courses may be understaffed. And so they would be looking for somebody, of course, with a core research area, even if it's in our own institution, that however can teach those courses. Otherwise, they wouldn't have people to teach them. But in that case, just the research area matters, right? Because as it was said before, you pick it up one way or the other.
I don't have a ton to say about this since I've never been on the other side yet. I will say the things that I was asked about when it came to like my talk and about teaching, it was more about how would I approach teaching and how do I envision my classroom looking? So it's more thinking through like, what is your pedagogy and like, how do you, kind of like what Mark said, how do you give information to people, which can come from a presentation as well. And then when I would talk about teaching experiences, it was just providing examples of what I told them. And so as long as you have an answer to the question, that you haven't had the opportunity to actually play that out yet, I think that's totally okay.
Agreed.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Here's a question for the more experienced members of the faculty panel here. When you have new candidates coming to your department, what are the sort of top one or two things that you're looking for in those candidates? Some of this probably intersects with what you talked about before, but maybe thinking about it from a little bit more from sort of the, I guess, the recruitment / interview angle that would be helpful for potential applicants here.
So shall I go first? Yeah, so in our end, definitely it depends sometimes whether it's a targeted search on a specific topic or it's a broad search. So in our department, we tend to carry a lot of broad searches because we prefer to look for the best people as opposed to necessarily for a specific area. And what really matters a lot in the application is often the research vision. So of course, it's for granted, right, that you have an established records of publications, maybe one or two key high impact papers that are well known in the field, but at the same time, where are you going to carry them, right, in the next 5 to 10 years, right? What's the research vision and how you're going to get there? So I think that's what matters a lot for us.
Yeah, I agree. It's consistent with what I said earlier, the vision of not just one project, but how you will be an accomplished person that will do lots of great things. It's important to be able to sell that. And then an additional thing that is a consideration is folks are probably assessing for cultural fit as well. That's not really something that you can control too well, right? You could have a sense of the culture and highlight aspects where you would fit in well. But if you're not going to fit in well, you probably can't really fake that too easily. But I think that is something else that we look at the very least, to identify whether there's a good fit.
Yeah, for fit, I wanted to add one more example, which would be in terms of potential collaborations with other researchers or educators of that institution, that if you can go into the interview having done the homework and identified genuine overlapping interests, that could help sway the balance in your favor. People would then advocate for wanting you as opposed to another candidate for that position.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And the last prepared question we'll do before we go jump into audience questions is, was there anything unexpected to you when you were doing your sort of application process?
I'll offer one, which I think Kat alluded to, and if you get to the interview stage, which I think is the most important initial cut, not everybody gets to talk to the panel. It can be an exercise in stamina. So I interviewed for this position and others during the pandemic. So all of the interviews were on Zoom. And so, having the right setup and being prepared is one thing, but some institutions, it was very quick with breaks in between. And I think what is more common is that it can be back-to-back for 1 or more days. And by the end of it, depending on what format, how interactive it is, and whether it's just being grilled with questions, there can be a lot of fatigue. And so that can reflect on the institution as well as whether you really want to go there. But I think having that, at least mentally and physically being prepared for that, is important.
Yeah, I think I would echo that of I was given this advice before, but I was surprised how necessary it was. Like, make sure you bring a water bottle, make sure you bring some granola bars. Every opportunity you're given to go to the bathroom, like whether you need to go or not, like go and take a moment to just like be by yourself and like take a breath. And just, take care of yourself during those weekends, because it is just, back-to-back talking to people. But the other thing that also surprised me, I was told that I was given advice before I went on interviews that I needed to have, something to say for every single person's research, which is challenging because at least in chemical engineering, like I'm a biological engineer. So if someone is like really deep into like catalysis or I don't do that. And what I found is that I did not need to talk to those people about their science. Like those are the people that I would talk to about department culture, about what's their life like in the area. And that's totally fine. And they're happy to talk to you about that as well. You want to be prepared. You want to know what their research is about, but like, you don't have to be like a little mini expert in every single person in the department, which is the impression I was given that made me like very anxious. And so I would say, don't feel like you have to learn everyone else's science.
So that directly relates to what I was going to say. I perhaps didn't have somebody preparing me quite like Kat did. I was surprised at the fact that my one-on-ones weren't about people grilling me, and that I really did need to have prepared questions. The topic doesn't necessarily need to be deep chemical catalysis, right? It can be about the things that Kat was talking about, but you should be prepared of if and when this person gets awkward and quiet, what am I going to ask about? And that to me was surprising because I expected I was just going to be like parrying stuff and dealing with other people's stuff the whole time. I will suggest in that context though, consider a balance in terms of how much you're asking about, life in the area versus something intellectual about the institution, right? They want to see that you're interested not just in what your life will be, but what in your career will be, right? So even if you don't know a lot about chemical catalysis, you could ask about, again, like Kat said, collaborative culture or other things that are, central to is this the right intellectual fit for you? If somebody were only asking, and I'm not saying that Kat said or did this, but if somebody were only asking everybody about like, where should I live? One might wonder how interested they were in engaging on an intellectual level.
And I'll say there are like, people have made lists online that you can find that are like things you should be asking. Like when you meet, if you get to meet the dean, these are things you should ask the dean about, like resources for the department, like, and because these are things you should know, and they're also things that they're expecting you to ask. And so like, do some Googling and you will find lots of those.
Yeah, so I don't have anything else to add, actually. For me, most of the process was surprising anyways. But one part that was for sure surprising is how much it counts the personal interactions with people. Sometimes it's just the impression that you give, whether you're interested, as it was said, in what the culture looks like and what the research there will be. So a lot of your questions are a trigger for them to figure out, are you really interested in them as well, right? And I think that's also important.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, everyone. All right, so we're going to start going through a few questions in the chat. And if we get through these without new ones coming up or people volunteering questions, I have a couple more that I can throw in as well. But first off, question from Jitendra. So while writing a research statement for your application, the question is basically, how much should you sort of reveal about your plans in order to maybe avoid being scooped or anything like that? Or is it like you should be totally free and open with what you plan to do?
Not to channel Eminem too much, but you have one shot, one opportunity to convince these people that you can be successful. So there's only so much that you can hold back and still be able to effectively do that. You have to put faith in the system that somebody is not going to take your stuff and steal it. And also keep in mind that you probably shouldn't be talking on a level of detail about stuff that is like stealable over the course of 6 to 12 months, right? You should be talking on a much bigger picture level, in a way that scooping really shouldn't be a possibility. But I would say you cannot hold back. This is how you're going to determine your next 10 to 50 years.
Yeah, I think it would be hard to imagine being scooped based on what you would put in, for instance, the research statement, because it's only a couple of pages, and so you wouldn't get into the detail where somebody's going to be doing the exact same thing. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't hire you. They have the in-house competitor. And I think when you have the meetings on campus or online with the current faculty members, it could go into a direction where you think maybe then there is some overlap, but you can also learn from those interactions in terms of maybe they try this and it didn't work, or they have some suggestions that could be helping your own research, regardless of where you end up. So I haven't found that to be a major concern.
You're muted.
Yeah, I realized. Thank you. So another follow-up question from Jitendra about teaching statements. If you don't have any teaching experience, what should you lean into on this? I think, Kat, you mentioned some ideas here, but can we expound a little bit on what to do if you don't have any teaching experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think you talk about what you value in your classroom and how you envision that playing out. And so I talked in mine a lot about like inclusive pedagogy and how I plan on doing that in my classroom. So doing, less lecture, more small group, like problem-based learning. So you talk about what you're going to do. And that honestly could easily take up half a page, like nothing. But then the thing you have to make sure you include for every school is what you're going to teach there. Like these are the classes that I'm enthusiastic to teach in your department. Actually get the class codes off of their course catalog. Say, I want to teach, you know, CHBE 328 transfer or thermodynamics, I don't know, like whatever class it is. Like actually say those things with a list of classes they have that you can teach. And then also say, this is the class that I would be enthusiastic to bring to your department that's based on my research. And so, you know, for me, it was like a protein engineering in the context of global health course that I'm excited to develop. Have I made it yet? No. But will I make it for a department someday? Yes. And so that's the thing you have to have, but it's mostly just envisioning what you want your classroom to look like. It can be talking about your experiences as a student too. Like when I was in classes, I felt like I learned really well like this. This is what I would want to incorporate into my classroom.
It's about the thoughtfulness of the response, even if you haven't had a lot of experience. It's legitimately thinking it through.
Awesome, thanks. Let's go on to the next one. So Ethan had a question. What are the traits of a graduating PhD student that can make them immediately competitive for faculty positions? And what do you recommend PhD students to do to get to that point quickly? Possibly circumventing a postdoc. I think we can generalize this question too to say, you know, from your perspectives, when is the right time to apply? What are you looking for in like a candidate's CVs or, yeah.
I have a comment on that topic. So we have a synthetic biology webinar series that I co-hosted at UF, and one of our speakers last year had just started her position at Stanford in bioengineering department. And it turns out she was hired straight out of her PhD, but decided to delay the start by 2 years so she could do a postdoc and learn how to work with the tomato system she wanted to implement for her own research questions. So do you really, I mean, it used to be the norm that maybe 20, 30 years ago, you could, if you're going to make it as an academic, you jump straight to faculty position, but there are benefits to actually doing a postdoctoral position to gain that experience in management or learning a new system.
Yeah, so I can just add on that we also look a lot at applicants that are straight out of PhD. And if they have a strong resume with, you know, high impact applications, highly novel, and they have a great research vision, but we think they are maybe a little inexperienced, right, to start their own research group, we hire them with the recommendation that maybe they first do 1 or a 2 year postdoc to essentially grasp all that experience that they haven't grasped yet. So it's not very common, but it still can happen. And the times that I've seen that happen is, again, high impact publications, essentially top of the line research in a certain area, which is also of high interest to the department.
In an effort to address the literal specific question, what could you add now? The things that Domitilla just said, like a paper in Nature. That's the obvious thing. I personally would say that the other obvious thing that could get you competitive now would be word of mouth from highly placed sources. I mean, I'm just being brutally honest that connections can be extremely helpful. And if you are in a lab of somebody that is like, this person is the next amazing engineer, you should get in on the ground floor before other people find out. That could be persuasive to make you competitive. So that's about networking and word of mouth, and frankly, not just of you, but of your advisor potentially as well. That to me would be the other thing that could really make you competitive. Otherwise, the supply and demand aspect of postdoc versus not postdoc makes it difficult in this field to be immediately competitive as a 4th or 5th year PhD student.
I will also quickly add, it sounds like this person doesn't want to do a postdoc, which I totally understand as a current postdoc. But I will say the question that I got at every single Zoom interview, so like the first screening interview that you do, and so I had like 10, 15 of those, was how am I different from my PIs? And if you've only ever been with one PI, that's a very difficult question to answer because you've only had one person teaching you. Your science is going to be very similar to theirs. Whereas if you take a postdoc, even if it's only for a year, but you kind of learn something that's complementary but different from what you did as a PhD student, you have a very clear answer to that question. I'm going to take this piece of my PhD and this part of my postdoc, and they're going to come together, and I've made something new. And so you don't have to do like a forever postdoc, but it certainly does help in distinguishing yourself and making your own unique research flavor for your lab.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I'm going to jump to a question that is related to something that Mark said, which is how political is the process of faculty interviews? Does prior networking play a big role, or is it mostly based on your application? So how much can that word of mouth sort of advertising for you really help?
Since I kind of caused this, there's something to be said in academia and outside of academia that connections can get your foot in the door. At the end of the day, you're not going to get the job because your advisor was person X. You're going to have to convince people that you are the real deal. But connections can help significantly, and that is just a fact of life. However, they are not required, right? And so that's what it is. They can make it easier, but they're definitely not required. You can come from a small lab that has 2 PhD students, publish some cool stuff, have some great ideas, and still get yourself a great position. But it is a fact of life that networking can open doors and give you initial opportunities.
Also, the prestige of the institution where you got your PhD. I think there are a number of surveys that can be looked up as to what are the odds you're going to be a professor if in the US, if your PhD is from a limited number of schools. But as a counterexample, I've seen sitting on faculty interviews now, candidates who come from top labs they have the Nature publication maybe, and then they interview and you realize, they were in a high performing team. They're not the ones who can actually, express that vision for the next 5 years. And then it's a very simple decision to look at the alternative candidates with maybe a less impressive CV, but more potential.
I think for me, this past year, I've always loved my PIs. I think they do a great job advocating for me. But I feel like what helped me in the application was in going very intentionally to BMES, to ACS, and to AICHE before I started the process, and going to every single department reception and talking to faculty in those departments so that when they see my written packet in front of them, along with however many other written packets, someone at that table has a face of being like, oh, I talked to that girl. She can speak like a human. Like she can acknowledge, like she can explain what she's talking about. She's personable. So like do those things. Like the year you plan to go on the market, like you go to those conferences and you are on the job during those conferences with free food and alcohol, if that's a plus plug for you to do that. So.
Yeah, I think this is a great point. And to add on that, I still remember something that my advisor told me my last year of the PhD. He told me, remember, and since now on, every talk you give, it's going to be a job talk, even if you are just at a conference. And that was really the case.
Yeah, I think I remember you saying that when I was in grad school. So it's great advice that definitely stuck with me. Okay, so speaking of the interviews on campus, a quick question. Are there any sort of things that you need to pay for, or is the department going to cover it?
I didn't pay for anything. I think I had to pay for a couple Ubers to the airport, which I think was reimbursed for, but I didn't pay for anything.
Yeah.
Okay, and then another question is, this one's from Sam. What is the best way to seek out or bring up potential teaching professor positions? Are these case by case, or are they predetermined, pre-allocated positions? And if you bring this up at an R1 school, does the fact that you're considering a teaching position disqualify you from the research faculty pool? So are teaching and research positions always sort of their own postings, or is there ever sort of some overlap in what a department is willing to sort of look at?
I think the positions that I've looked at in recent years, they're all very clearly defined. There could be history behind the, written between the lines that you're not aware of. So you can inquire about that at the interview stage. But generally, you should know what aspects of your experience to emphasize, because you would not be competitive if you want to teach and the position is research intensive.
Yeah, and just from what I've seen too, there's a lot more like teaching professor positions that are popping up now at R1 schools as well. And so they're usually more, I think, fairly clearly defined now, which is helpful. Okay, so Tracy has a question. My research is very interdisciplinary. Any recommendations for applying for a faculty position in a department that fits your research but doesn't match what your degree is in?
I am not a chemical engineer. I will be in a chemical engineering department. It's doable. I think what you need to be prepared to answer if you're going to do that is that you are capable of teaching those classes. And some of that is saying, I've demonstrated that I know how to learn. I can learn things and I can teach them. Some of it is finding, so I did biomedical engineering. So it's looking for, we had a fluid dynamics class that is probably slightly different than a chemical engineering fluid dynamics class, but I bet it has the same core equations. Like, this would be the class that I would want to teach first of core classes because I feel capable and competent to teach it. It's definitely possible. I did it. But you just need to be prepared to talk about teaching and how to answer those questions, because they're gonna ask them. And I do recommend applying across departments. It increases the pool of places you can apply.
I agree with everything that Kat just said wholeheartedly, and would like to add, you also may need to consider the answer to the question of how well suited are our students for executing the research that you want to, or vice versa. How well suited is your research for the pool of students that we have? Can you accomplish what you want? Some places might have other ways to get specific pools of students that are maybe outside of the main pipeline for that department. But I think that's another question you might expect.
And I think many large institutions in the US will have cross-college or cross-departmental graduate programs. So that's another way to actually recruit students who have the right interests or background. I'm in this position myself. I'm in a horticultural science department, so working alongside plant breeders who, work in the field while I work with cells in the lab. And there is no issue because we have access to synthetic biology working group with people in engineering, genetics programs that include biomedical research. You just have to look at what's available to make sure that you know what resources to tap into.
Yeah, to add on top of that, I'm also an electrical engineering major. I am in a mechanical engineering department doing synthetic biology. So we have the whole spectrum there. But the key thing is that I can get the students that can do what I need them to do. And definitely McKee, for me, covers that core that I use of techniques in what I do. And the other, I think, maybe questions that you may raise during interviews is how easy it is to hire students from other departments. In some schools, it's very easy. You can access their application folders, even if it's not in your unit, but in other school is not. And so in those cases, you may have a harder time for interdisciplinary research.
Yeah, great. Thanks, everyone. Maybe one or two more questions, depending on how long we take to answer them. So next one is, can you comment on diversity and inclusion statements for application packages? How might one approach writing a strong but also genuine DEI statement, especially for people that are not coming from underrepresented backgrounds in STEM?
I can try to answer this as someone who wrote one of these recently. I mean, it is challenging. Like as a white person writing a DEI statement, I definitely felt uncomfortable. But I think that sometimes that uncomfort makes you think about why you're uncomfortable, and that's the emotion that you want to put into that statement. And so what schools are going to look for, what they're going to ask you about is both what you've done in the past, how you've thought about it. So this could be mentoring students, even just like talk about mentoring undergrads and how you're trying to increase that pipeline of undergrads to graduate school. You could be talking about if you've done outreach, what has that outreach looked like if you've gone to a high school, if you've gone to a middle school. And then it's thinking through how you envision increasing equity in your lab. And so a big part of my DEI statement was talking about like, these are the practices that I plan on implementing as a PI to support my students well, to ensure that, you know, not only are we recruiting a diverse population of students, but we are retaining those students in our programs. And then how we will implement outreach programs within our group. And so if you haven't done a community experiences before, vision cast forward. If you do have experiences where you've been doing outreach and things like that, talk about those and then vision cast them forward. What they're going to care about is what you are going to be as a PI and what is your lab going to look like and how are you going to do that. So they care about what you're going to do in the future.
And I think another consideration is consider the demographics and the needs of that institution, that community. There will be very different geographical needs comparing positions in Canada, for instance, with ones in the US, vary by state as well. And the DEI is also important for broader impacts if you're going to be applying to the National Science Foundation. So I think there's good examples you can also find online from what different professors have already done. And it's important to highlight something that resonates with your mission, your research, so that you're not proposing something that's so generic that it's going to be hard to stand behind.
Okay, and last question. So what are the current expectations for bringing grant funding with you as a new hire? Maybe I can add one little piece to this. Do you need to have a K-99 or equivalent?
No.
Yeah, no. One could say that it might put blood in the water, right? That like, oh, here's somebody that some grant agency has suggested is capable of doing work and bringing in money. And so it might grab attention. It is absolutely not necessary. I'm sorry, at least in my department, and we're a reasonably high-ranked chemical engineering department. I don't know if the case is different in say biology or BME. However, I don't think that there's enough K-99s to go around. So I don't think that it's required, but it could get people interested.
Yeah, I will say I do have a K. I did not have a K when I got my job offer, my multiple job offers. And I agree with what Mark said. Like, do they want you or do they want your money? Do they want, you know, the fact that this other person's behind you? So I did have to make a decision when I got my K of, do I accept one of the job offers I have and defer it for a year, or do I do the market again next year where maybe I could, you know, go to like a super duper high, I don't know. And I decided I didn't want to do that. I decided I wanted to be a place where they wanted me as a person to be a part of their community, to be a part of their research collaborative environment. And And so that's why I'm still a postdoc and on this panel. It's because I'm doing the K portion of my award, but I did not have it, and I had several job offers, and so you definitely don't need it.
Yeah, so I resonate with that. Absolutely. You don't need to bring in any funding when you are hired, although somehow in the vision statement, right, in your application, it should percolate from that, the fact that you will not have any problems, right, in raising funds for your research activities. And I think that's part of the building that vision, right, of the future that has an impact, right? So if you can articulate, right, the impact that it has, then I think it's becoming more evident to the committee that, oh yeah, I see the impact, right? It could be funded by NSF, NIH, the DoD, and so on.
And that's a standard question that you will typically get if you're asked to do like a chalk talk or something that's not in your slides. Basically outline what agencies you will apply for and when, and the counterpoint to those applications is you're going to get a startup package. So you need to do the math and actually make sure that that is sufficient to give you the buffer time until you will get the first federal grant, and then you have a sustainable program.
And I would say the answers to those questions should be in your written package too, just quickly. Like I had at the end of my first page was an overview, and at the very bottom of that overview, it was, and this is where I plan on applying for funding, and list like not just the NIH, like which institute at the NIH, which center at the NSF is going to be interested in this, and say like this piece of my project is interesting to them because they want to know that.
And for NIH, if you want to seem really fancy, you might want to identify a study section too.
All right, awesome. Thanks, guys. Really helpful information there. And I think we'll call it, it's just past 12 now. Thank you all for coming to this panel and giving your great insights. Thanks to everybody that came and asked a lot of great questions. This has been hopefully really helpful for everyone involved. I just want to give another round of applause to the panel. And, you know, good luck, Kat, starting your faculty soon. You know, thanks for coming on. I know it's a busy time trying to finish up a postdoc and getting a lab started soon, and everybody else as well for taking the time out to participate in this. You know, it's faculty like you that help all of us sort of make the next step. And so we all really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Good luck all.